There's one image that gets more haunting the longer you stare at it. A man standing on an airport runway in Tehran, dressed in a dark suit, his wife beside him, a plane waiting in the background. That man is Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, King of Kings, Light of the Aryans, ruler of one of the oldest civilizations in human history. The date is January 16, 1979, and he is leaving his country for the final time. He doesn't know it yet, but he'll never set foot in Iran again. 18 months later, he'll die in a military hospital in Cairo, deserted by almost every ally who once courted him, stripped of his titles, reduced to a man with nowhere left to go. What happened next to his family? The House of Pahlavi is almost unbelievable. A dynasty that once sat on some of the largest oil reserves on earth, that threw the most extravagant party of the 20th century, that was flattered and courted by every major Western power, scattered across the globe like debris from an explosion. Some members rebuilt their lives. Some fought back. Some didn't make it. This is what became of Iran's royal family after their empire collapsed. And to understand the fall, we first need to understand how impossibly high they'd climbed up. It didn't trace back centuries the way the Qayyars or Safavids before it did. It was, in essence, invented, born out of ambition, military muscle, and a country that was falling apart at the seams. In the early 1920s, Persia, not yet widely called Iran, was crumbling under foreign meddling and internal rot. The ruling Qayyar dynasty, in power since the late 1700s, was weak and riddled with corruption. Britain and Russia had effectively split the country's resources between them. Parliament existed mostly for show. The last Qayyar monarch spent most of his time abroad, nominally for his health, but really just checked out from a nation in crisis. Into that void stepped Reza Khan, born in 1878 in a mountain village in northern Iran to a modest military family. He enlisted early, joined the Persian Cossack Brigade, a unit originally trained by Russian officers, and climbed the ranks with startling speed thanks to sheer physical presence and iron will. By 1921, he commanded enough loyal troops to pull off a coup. His 1,200-man brigade seized key positions in Tehran and toppled the sitting government in a matter of hours. At first, Reza Khan worked from the shadows, Minister of War, then Prime Minister. He floated the idea of turning Iran into a republic, but the clergy and public pushed back hard, so he changed course. In 1925, Parliament formally removed the absent Qayyar Shah, and a hand-picked assembly crowned Reza Khan as the new monarch. He adopted the surname Pahlavi, borrowed from pre-Islamic Persia, a deliberate nod tying his new regime to the ancient glory of the Persian empires. Months later, in Golestan Palace, he lifted a freshly made crown and placed it on his own head. No archbishop, no centuries-old ritual, just a man crowning himself. A new royal line had begun. Reza Shah ruled with an iron fist. He dismantled the power of tribal leaders, seized enormous amounts of land, modernized the army, built the Trans-Iranian Railway, and pushed reforms including women's rights and secular schooling, essentially attempting his own version of what Ataturk had done in Turkey. But his methods created enemies on every side. The clergy hated his secularism, tribal chiefs resented losing their autonomy, and Britain, which had tolerated him as a stabilizing force, grew alarmed by his warming relationship with Nazi Germany in the late 1930s, when World War II erupted. Iran's oil fields and its position as a supply corridor between the Soviets and the Allies made it strategically vital. In August 1941, British and Soviet troops invaded from opposite directions. Reza Shah, who had declared neutrality, had no real choice. The Allies forced his abdication. On September 16, 1941, he signed away the throne, handed it to his 21-year-old son, and was exiled. He died alone in Johannesburg in 1944. Far from the nation he'd built from scratch, Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi was nothing like his father. Where Reza Shah had seized power through raw force, his son inherited a throne he hadn't earned, in a country under foreign occupation, surrounded by advisors he couldn't fully trust. For his first 12 years as monarch, he was largely a figurehead, his authority limited by parliament and, increasingly, by a magnetic nationalist politician named Mohammad Mossadegh. Mossadegh was everything the young Shah wasn't. Bold, dramatic, beloved by the public. In 1951, he did something that alarmed both London and Washington. He nationalized Iran's oil industry. The Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, later BP, had been pulling Iranian oil out of the ground for decades on terms wildly favorable to Britain. Mossadegh decided that was over. Britain retaliated with a punishing economic blockade and began working to remove him from power. Eventually pulling in the Americans. The Eisenhower administration, gripped by Cold War paranoia, was convinced Mossadegh's government could fall to Iran's Communist Tudeh party, despite the CIA's own analysts doubting that scenario. Political will won out over intelligence. In August 1953, the CIA and Britain's MI6 launched Operation Ajax, bribing military officers, staging fake protests, paying off newspapers to run anti-Mossadegh propaganda. The first coup attempt failed outright. Mossadegh had been tipped off. Key plotters were arrested, and the Shah fled first to Baghdad, then Rome. But CIA officer Kermit Roosevelt Jr., grandson of Theodore Roosevelt, refused to abandon the operation despite orders to stand down. He organized new demonstrations, rallied pro-Shah army units, and on August 19th, after street clashes that killed roughly 300 people, Mossadegh surrendered. The Shah returned to Tehran victorious. From that day forward, he understood a hard truth. His crown didn't rest on the will of his own people, it rested on backing from Washington and London. That realization defined everything he did afterward. For the next 26 years he ruled as an absolute monarch, propped up by American money, American advisors, and an increasingly ruthless secret police force known as SAVAK. In 1963 he launched the White Revolution, land redistribution, women's suffrage, literacy programs, reforms that looked progressive on paper but alienated nearly everyone in practice. Clergy saw an attack on religious authority. Landowners lost property. Leftists dismissed it as a Western scripted diversion from real democratic reform. A fiery cleric named Ruhollah Khomeini emerged as a leading voice of opposition, was arrested, then exiled, spending the next 15 years abroad smuggling sermons into Iran on cassette tapes. Meanwhile, the Shah funneled Iran's oil wealth into a vision of hyper-modernization. In 1971 he threw a lavish celebration marking 2,500 years of Persian monarchy at Persepolis, foreign leaders dining on food flown in from Paris, served on fine china inside air-conditioned desert tents. Estimates of the cost range from $25 million to $100 million. To ordinary Iranians living in poverty nearby, it looked grotesque. The Shah pressed on regardless, chasing a vision of Iran as a top 5 global power by the year 2000. Anyone in his way was bought off or made to dis. At the mid-1970s, the fractures were spreading faster than SAVAK could patch them. Oil revenue had quadrupled after the 1973 embargo, fueling runaway inflation that crushed the urban poor. Rural migrants poured into Tehran and landed in slums with no running water, while foreign contractors built 5-star hotels nearby. Corruption spread through the Shah's inner circle, with state money quietly moving into foreign accounts. The Pahlavi Foundation, nominally a charity, had amassed an estimated $20 billion in holdings, functioning more like a private investment fund for the royal family. Throughout 1978, protest and crackdown fed each other in an escalating loop. A state-planted newspaper insult against Khomeini sparked riots in Qom in January. Security forces killed demonstrators. 40 days later, morning marches, a Shia tradition, turned into fresh protests, which were met with more violence, and the cycle repeated itself, growing each time. In September, troops opened fire on a massive crowd in Tehran's Yaleh Square, later called Black Friday, killing dozens. Strikes spread across the country, including in the oil sector. By October, a nationwide strike had ground the country to a halt. On January 16, 1979, the Shah boarded a plane at Mehrabad Airport, telling reporters he was going on a short holiday. He never came home. What followed wasn't a simple change in government. It was the total unraveling of everything the Pahlavis had built, followed by years of grief, wandering, and slow disintegration. The Shah bounced from country to country: Egypt, Morocco, the Bahamas, Mexico, each host growing nervous about provoking the new government in Tehran and quietly asking him to move along. He was rapidly becoming a diplomatic liability nobody wanted to hold on to. Back home, Khomeini returned to Tehran on February 1, 1979, greeted by millions. Within days, the old regime's remnants collapsed. Revolutionary courts sprang up almost overnight. On February 16th, 4 of the Shah's generals were executed by firing squad on the roof of Khomeini's headquarters, the first of many. Military officers, SAVAK agents, cabinet ministers, and parliamentarians were rounded up, Some trials lasted less than an hour with no defense present. Former Prime Minister Amir Abbas Haveda and former Savak chief Nematollah Nasri were both executed. The Pahlavi Foundation's assets were seized. Shah of Iran Palace, where the Shah and Empress Farah had raised their children, was turned into a public museum showcasing the decadence of the fallen monarchy. And the Shah was dying. He'd been secretly battling non-Hodgkin's lymphoma for years, hidden even from most of his own government. By late 1979, his condition had worsened to the point he needed specialized care only available in a few hospitals worldwide. On October 22, 1979, President Jimmy Carter reluctantly allowed him into the U.S. for treatment. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. In Tehran, his admission to America looked like proof of another CIA plot to restore him to power. On November 4th, revolutionary students stormed the U.S. Embassy and took more than 50 diplomats hostage, demanding his extradition. The hostage crisis lasted for 144 days, wrecked Carter's presidency, and severed U.S.-Iran relations for good. Under pressure, the Shah left the U.S. for Panama. Where the government grew uneasy, there were even whispers of a possible extradition deal with Tehran. Finally, in March 1980, Egypt's President Anwar Sadat, one of the Shah's only remaining loyal allies, opened his doors again. The Shah, gravely ill, flew to Cairo, where surgeons removed his cancerous spleen. Post-surgical infection proved too much. On July 27, 1980, at age 60, Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi died in a Cairo military hospital. Sadat gave him a state funeral, but almost no world leaders attended. Richard Nixon came as a private citizen. Sitting President Carter sent no representative at all. A man once courted by presidents and royalty was laid to rest in near silence. Empress Farah, 41 at the time, was left holding together for children and a legacy turned into a burden. She stayed in Egypt initially, but after Sadat's assassination in 1981, the family's footing there grew shaky. In 1982, President Reagan invited the family to settle in the United States, and they eventually put down roots in the Washington, D.C. suburbs, Maryland, and Connecticut. Farah worked to preserve her husband's legacy, engaged in humanitarian work with UNESCO, and supported the growing Iranian diaspora. But exile fractured the family one tragedy at a time. Princess Ashraf, the Shah's twin sister, nicknamed the Black Panther by the French press for her fierce political instincts, had once served as Iran's UN representative and wielded enormous influence behind the scenes. After the revolution, she split her exile between Paris, New York, and Monte Carlo, remaining a vocal critic of the new regime. Tehran wanted to send a message, and it did so through violence. On December 7, 1979, her son, Prince Shahryar Shafik, a 34-year-old former Imperial Navy officer who'd escaped Iran to organize resistance abroad, was shot twice in the head by a masked gunman on a Paris street. The Islamic Republic later claimed responsibility, even publishing an obituary praising his killer as a martyr. It marked the first known assassination in what became a broader campaign against exiled royal family members. Ashraf lived on, defiant but increasingly withdrawn from public life, until her death in 2016 at age 96. The Shah and Farah's four children, Reza born 1960, Farana's 1963, Ali Reza 1966, and Leela 1970, went from a childhood of palaces and private tutors to being teenagers and children in exile almost overnight, carrying a name that had become, to millions of Iranians, a symbol of everything gone wrong. Princess Leela, the youngest, may have carried it hardest. Too young to fully grasp the revolution as it happened, but old enough to feel everything it took from her. She grew up shuttling between Connecticut and Paris, studying literature and philosophy at Brown, fluent in several languages. On the surface, an elegant, cosmopolitan life. Underneath, she battled depression, an eating disorder, and dependence on prescription medication for years. She never married, drifting between hotels in London and Paris. On June 10, 2001, she was found dead in a London hotel room at age 31. An autopsy found more than 5 times the lethal dose of barbiturates in her system. It was ruled a probable suicide. Farah later said simply that Leela had been a sensitive girl who'd suffered greatly. The funeral, held in Paris, was small and quiet, no state honors, no flags, just a mother burying her youngest child. 9 years later, tragedy struck again. Ali Reza Pahlavi, 12 when the family fled, became a serious academic, Princeton, then graduate work at Columbia and Harvard focused on Iranian history and philology. He was in a relationship with Raha Didavar and the couple was expecting a child. But he carried the same crushing weight as his sister, losing his father at 14, losing Leela at 34, and an aching helplessness over his homeland's fate. On January 4, 2011, he was found dead in his Boston apartment at age 44, from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. His brother Reza said publicly that Ali Reza, like so many young Iranians, had been shattered by what had happened to the country he loved, on top of the grief of losing a father and sister so young. 6 months after his death, his daughter, Iryana Leela Pahlavi, was born, named for her late aunt. By this point, Empress Farah had buried her husband, her youngest daughter, and her younger son. Foreign press dubbed it the Pahlavi curse, and there's truth in that description. But something else was happening quietly alongside the grief. The long weight of the crown. Prince Reza Pahlavi, the eldest son, was 17 when he left Iran in 1978 to train as a fighter pilot at Reese Air Force Base in Texas. He never went home. After his father's death in 1980, he held a ceremony declaring himself the rightful Shah of Iran, a 20-year-old monarch with no throne. For decades since, he's occupied a strange political limbo. A king without a country, a head of state that exists on paper only. He settled near Washington, D.C., married attorney Yasmin in 1986, and raised 3 daughters, Noor, Ayman, and Farah. He earned a political science degree from USC, gave speeches, wrote books, and cultivated ties with American politicians drawn to the idea of regime change in Tehran. For years, serious analysts largely dismissed him, a relic sustained mostly by an older generation of exiles nostalgic for pre-revolution Iran. While inside the country, even mentioning the Pahlavis favorably could get you arrested. Then came 2022. On September 16, 22-year-old Mahsa Amini died in the custody of Iran's morality police after being detained for allegedly wearing her hijab improperly. Her death, which appeared to involve severe beatings, ignited something decades of political opposition hadn't managed to. The Woman, Life, Freedom Uprising, the largest wave of protest against the Islamic Republic since 1979. Amid the unrest, protesters began chanting Reza Pahlavi's name, not necessarily out of a desire to restore the monarchy, but because he was the most visible face of an alternative to the current regime. He capitalized on the moment, organizing rallies across the West, appearing on international news, urging Iranian security forces to defect, and helping assemble a coalition with figures like Nobel laureate Shirin Ebadi and Kurdish leader Abdullah Motadi. One independent poll of over 158,000 respondents inside Iran found Pahlavi as the top choice among 34 possible transitional council candidates, with around 33% support. But the moment also exposed real fractures in the opposition. Many on the left, and among Kurdish and other ethnic minority groups, remained deeply wary of him, remembering Savak and the authoritarian record of both Pahlavi Shahs, and fearing a Pahlavi restoration would just trade one form of top-down rule for another. His 2023 visit to Israel, where he met Prime Minister Netanyahu, drew sharp criticism even from regime opponents who saw it as aligning with it. Foreign power over Iranian sovereignty. The 2022 protests eventually faded under a brutal crackdown that killed hundreds and detained tens of thousands, and the regime survived, as it has survived every prior challenge. Reza Pahlavi returned to his familiar in-between existence, more visible than before, but still, fundamentally, a man without a country. Then in 2025 and 2026, events accelerated once more. Military strikes on Iran by the US and Israel, which Pahlavi publicly framed as a humanitarian intervention, pushed him back into the international spotlight. He called on Iranian security forces to defect, argued the Islamic Republic was on the verge of collapse, and unveiled what he called the Iran Prosperity Project, a proposed roadmap for democratic transition. Whether any of this amounts to real momentum or simply wishful thinking remains hotly debated both inside Iran and across its diaspora. Today, Empress Farah Pahlavi is 87, splitting her time between the US and Paris, maintaining a dignified, low-key public presence through cultural and philanthropic work. She has outlived her husband, 2 of her 4 children, and a nephew. and watched her homeland transform from a modernizing monarchy into a theocratic state that has now been at odds with its own population for decades. The family fortune, once estimated at $1 to $2 billion personally, with the Pahlavi Foundation controlling billions more, was largely frozen or seized after the revolution. Her current finances are private, though reports suggest a far more modest lifestyle than her imperial past would suggest. Reza Pahlavi, 65, lives on a roughly 6,000 square foot estate in Potomac, Maryland, valued at around $2 million, and remains the most politically active surviving family member. His daughters have largely stayed out of the public eye, though the eldest, Noor, has appeared at some political events. Princess Faranas, the Shah's eldest daughter, born in 1963, has lived the most private life of anyone in the family, avoiding public attention and political commentary almost entirely. The wider Pahlavi family, siblings, nieces, nephews, cousins, scattered even further after the revolution. Shams Pahlavi, the Shah's older sister, settled in Santa Barbara, California, and died there in 1996 at 78. Princess Ashraf outlived almost her entire generation, dying in 2016 after decades split between Paris, New York, and the French Riviera. Her daughter Azad Shafik also died in exile. The bigger picture read its core. This is a story about what happens when power vanishes overnight. One day you're ruling one of the world's wealthiest nations, hosting foreign leaders, controlling oil that runs half the global economy. The next, you're refugees, watching your generals executed on television and your palaces turned into museums by people who see your family as the embodiment of everything wrong with the country. It's also a story about what exile does to people who never chose it. Leela and Ali Reza didn't ask to be born into a royal family, didn't ask to be exiled at 9 and 12 years old, didn't ask to carry a fallen dynasty's weight on their shoulders, and in the end, they didn't survive carrying it, and it's a story that isn't finished. Iran's internal contradictions keep deepening. A young, connected population increasingly rejecting theocratic rule, an economy strained by sanctions and mismanagement, a security state that rules through force rather than legitimacy, and a diaspora of millions, including the surviving Pahlavis, still waiting to see whether the country they lost will ever open its doors again. Whether Reza Pahlavi ends up playing any real role in that future is still an open question. To supporters, he's a unifying bridge between Iran's monarchist past and a possible democratic future. To critics, he's a living reminder of the very authoritarianism that pushed Iran toward the mullahs in the first place. The truth, as with most things in Iranian history, probably sits somewhere in between. One thing is certain: the House of Pahlavi, a dynasty that didn't exist before 1925 and lost everything by 1979, left a permanent mark on one of the world's most complicated nations. And the family, diminished but not gone, remains a living thread connecting every decision that built the Iran we see today.